So, John, can I begin by asking you, um, what is the world doing currently about climate change?
Well, currently, the world, I suppose, being made up of lots of different countries means that our response to climate change, in essence, is what each individual country is willing to do. So each country, or most nearly every country, has put a plan together to try and demonstrate and show how it's going to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions, which obviously lead to increasing temperature, which causes climate change. So each country, in essence, is going to try and reduce its emissions by certain levels. Some countries quite rapidly, other countries are even going to have slight increases. But overall, if every country did what they said they'd do, it would mean a reduction in the overall greenhouse gas emissions, which we would have across the world. Whether that's enough or not, of course, is highly debatable.
So, can you give us a broad overview of the adequacy of the Paris Agreement in helping us do what we need to do?
So the Paris Agreement is an international agreement signed by most countries in the world who have all signed up to try and stop the global temperature increasing by 2 degrees with an aim to get it to be well below 2 degrees. And often people refer to increasing global temperature by 1.5 degrees. Each country then has put forward their plan. These are called nationally determined contributions. And in that plan, they say what they're going to do to reduce emissions. Sadly, when you add all of the contribution of each country's plan together, it doesn't go anywhere near delivering the reduction which they've all promised to, i.e. reducing global temperatures so that, reducing global emissions so that they don't go up by 1.5 degrees. So the plan gets us about half of the way there at the moment.
So what do you think needs to come next in terms of the next United Nations, the COP26?
So the next big meeting's in Glasgow next year, and at this meeting, it's essential that each country comes forward with a plan that aligns itself with the amount of emissions, which ensures that the whole globe does not increase more than 1.5 degrees. And as I said, at the moment, we are way off that target. What they need to recognise is that it's not just about where we happen to be in 2050 or 2060, it's the total cumulative emissions which we release from now up till 2060. So what we need to see is a short-term emergency plan for rapid reduction over the next 10 years. If we don't get that, we've almost certainly missed our opportunity to achieve the overall goal of the Paris Agreement.
Can you give us an overview of what the UK is doing, what the government's doing, businesses and other responses?
Yeah, so the UK government is one of only a few to commit to reduce its emissions to net zero by 2050. Net zero means that the amount of emissions that we release will be the same as the amount of emissions which are removed and absorbed by the planet. So therefore, we will in effect be at zero emissions. As well as that, they've also recognised this, as I said, it's not just where we end up in 2050, it's a pathway and the total emissions which we release on the way to 2050. So they've put in place what are known as carbon budgets, which are 5 yearly targets, which we have to achieve along the way. And they have a separate organisation which scrutinises them called the Climate Change Committee, and it tells them what that pathway should be to emissions being net zero by 2050. The government's then required to put a plan together to show how they're going to do this. At the moment, there is no comprehensive plan by the UK government which tells us how we're going to meet that target. Instead, the latest announcement in October 2020 was that we would have a 10-point plan, which in essence is just a list of good things that we can do to achieve it. But what we don't know is how all of those 10 points, which involve increasing renewable energy and which involve making homes more efficient, which involve businesses reducing their emissions and so on. We don't know how that plan leads to the desired target and outcome. And there's a major gap there, which green charities and organisations and universities have really been pushing the government to try and tell us how they're going to do it. That doesn't mean also that nothing is happening. We've had a huge increase in renewable energy over that time period, but there's so much more that needs to be done. Some businesses have taken real responsibility for this and are putting in plans to reduce their emissions to net zero by 2030 or 2040. However, some of these are really well-intentioned. Others could broadly be described as greenwashing, i.e. just sort of an advertising campaign to do it. One major concern that we still have is that if we look at the investment from major fossil fuel companies in 2019, they invested $55 billion in trying to find new oil and $2 billion in expanding renewable energy. So that clearly shows that there are some businesses who are driving in the wrong direction, or there are others with good intentions looking to reduce their emissions. In terms of our collective effort, of course, as individuals, we can do a lot, but we need the government to help us to do that. So, of course, we could use public transport, but it needs to be available and needs to be affordable. We can make our homes more efficient, so we reduce our energy use in our own homes. We could avoid flying, which is one of the most carbon-intensive activities that you could do. We could also think about our diet as well. Lots of meat in the diet means higher greenhouse gas emissions. So there's a lot we can do, but really all of that needs to fit into the grand plan, which we're still waiting for the government to release.
Can you explain a little about what sustainable consumption and production modelling means?
We can measure our emissions by the emissions that occur inside our country, and that's from a production or territorial perspective. And the UK has done really well at reducing those emissions. From 1990 up to present day, they're down by about 42%. However, we import a lot of products which required energy and subsequent emissions to produce. We now import more than we ever have. And so in reality, one of the key reasons why our emissions have gone down in our country is because we're producing the products elsewhere. Then there's someone else's emissions, and then we're importing the products. And when we look at it from this consumption perspective, i.e. what we've consumed and the impact of it, then our emissions have only gone down by about 12% as opposed to 42%. So it's not such a rosy picture. So we would argue that it's important to think about what we're consuming so we can reduce our global emissions of UK activity, and not just reduce the emissions that happen inside our country. So in essence, there's many ways that we can account for carbon and take responsibility for it. What's most important is that we can put all the policies in place to reduce our emissions as fast as we can.
So how can the world transition towards a low carbon pathway?
Unfortunately, there isn't one easy answer which is going to solve everything. Obviously, the government would like to just be able to wave a magic wand, but in reality, we need a different solution and different response to each area of our lives and each industrial sector. So therefore, it requires us to align everything in the same direction. And that means that we have to stop subsidizing companies which are responsible for high emissions, fossil fuel companies, aviation sector. We have to, in essence, challenge the vested interests of businesses which are driving in the opposite direction. At the same time, we need to support and innovate the companies which are trying to lead the way in leading low carbon lifestyles. These include renewable energy companies which are trying to repair all the products as opposed to us constantly replacing them with new ones. We need to support them as much as we can through tax incentives and giving investment and in essence driving them as businesses forward. We also then need to make it easier for us as individuals to lead low carbon lifestyles. We need good access to fresh, seasonal, low impact food. We need good access to public transport. We need good access to jobs and opportunities which are in the low carbon sector and not just ones and being in the sectors which in essence are causing most of these problems. So in essence, it's not just a plan when we say, let's have lots of renewables. We need to align every single element of government activity and our lifestyles to achieve the kind of scale of change that we do at this sort of rapid speed which is required.
Thank you. That's brilliant. Can I ask you one more question?
Of course you can.
Which is, so I'm going to ask you about what you think schools can do.
Okay.
Okay, just pause a second. So for the editing bit. Actually, I'll ask you in two chunks. I'll ask you what do you think teachers can do? What do you think teachers and schools can do? And what do you think young people can do? Okay, so what do you think teachers and schools can do to help this process?
I think we've seen the power of action by younger people through individuals like Greta Thunberg. And in essence, it shows just quite how powerful young people could be at creating change. And I think that teachers have a unique opportunity to recognize the multifaceted problem that climate change is and include it in all areas of the curriculum. It's not just about a lesson in geography or one lesson in science. It's about understanding it from a perspective of businesses, in business studies, in economics. It can be, in essence, applied to so many different areas of the curriculum to get people to understand how to address and tackle this problem. And therefore, it needs truly embedding across the curriculum as opposed to an individual item which may be of interest. And at the same time, we often see people becoming increasingly anxious about it because the effects of climate change really are quite severe. So offering and highlighting the solutions and how people can play an active and positive part in creating change, I think, is just as important.
Great, fantastic. Can I? You did already talk about students. Shall I ask you? I'll ask you that again in case you've got something else to say. Don't worry if you haven't. And we're just, so these sort of added bits which I could see could be very useful in the introductory bit before people go on and do the online course. Okay. What do you think young people can do to help tackle the process of climate change?
I think young people can come together to be a powerful voice to demonstrate the need for change. In lots of the sort of studies on attitudes towards climate change, it's children who often have most clarity on what's needed to be done. As people have got older, they talk about the complexity of, oh, we've got to think about businesses, we've got to think about these issues. But in reality, that's just in essence giving too much attention to vested interests. Children come with a real purity and clarity of thought around the need for action of climate change. So I feel that they, in essence, are a powerful voice and will be heard if they're continuing to, in essence, stand up and demonstrate what's needed. They get a sense of the scale of change often more than adults seem to. And in reality, they also, at some point in the future, we will need the skill base that they have to help us find those solutions in all areas, from engineering to mathematics to economics to understanding our history, our past, and understanding geography and the issues around it, issues of distribution and inequality. And for me, in essence, if we don't really prioritize climate change, we are having a missed opportunity. Children really can make a big difference.